Hello, and welcome to the April Crane Research Forum. Thank you for joining us today. We're so glad that you're here. My name is Dr. Rebecca Dorr, and I'm the Director of Research here at the Crane Center for Early Childhood Research and Policy. My colleague Janelle is going to be monitoring our chat box today, and we'll be adding some housekeeping items there. These monthly forums feature research on emerging or key topics that impact the field of early childcare and education. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome the Crane Center's own Dr. Scott Graves. Dr. Graves is a professor of school psychology in the Department of Educational Studies at The Ohio State University and a faculty associate here at the Crane Center. Dr. Graves is a nationally recognized scholar whose research focuses on identifying protective factors and strengths that promote positive social and emotional and academic outcomes for Black children, particularly for Black boys. His work spans child development, assessment, social emotional intervention, and equity in education, with an emphasis on culturally responsive assessment and intervention practices. He has served as principal investigator on multiple federally funded projects supported by the U.S. Department of Education and the National Science Foundation, and has held national leadership roles within the American Psychological Association, including chair of the Committee on Ethnic Minority Affairs and the Committee on Psychological Tests and Assessment. Today, Dr. Graves will discuss gaps in the use of evidence-based interventions in urban schools and share his recent research exploring practitioners' perspectives and highlighting the ways in which systemic barriers and cultural mismatches can influence practice. And at that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Graves.
Thanks for that introduction, Dr. Dorr. And now I will share my screen. So thanks for everyone for being here today to listen to my talk titled Navigating Evidence-Based Interventions in Urban Schools, Practitioner Perspectives on Systemic Barriers. So here's a quick introduction. I've been doing this work for a long time and I'm really passionate about it. And one of the things that I've seen as a school psychologist, as a practitioner, as a licensed psychologist, is just a lack of opportunities for children. And my research focuses on Black children specifically. And when we think about, what do children need to be successful in urban schools, we know what those things are. However, with limited resources, a complex landscape, we live in a test and place landscape. One of the things that we hope we can count on are evidence-based interventions, interventions that have already been developed and structured, and we know that works. And so this presentation is going to expand on some of my previous work. And we're going to look at a couple things. We're going to look at four studies. Two have been recently published and two that are ongoing studies. And so we're going to get started now talking about those studies. Here's 31. This is recently published in October of 2025. It was led by Ms. Sophia Sharif, who's a doctoral candidate in the school psychology program here at The Ohio State University, and her colleagues. And so she did this as a part of our research group, and it's titled Systematic Review of Treatments for Depression in Young Black Girls and Women. And so one of the things we think about, especially with our suicide rates increasing, particularly in this population, is what works? What interventions can we use, whether it be in schools or communities, that could potentially help, just say, Black girls for depression? And we have a lot of things going on in the world with social media, and just increasing pressures to be a girl in this society. And so these would be interventions we think would be readily available. So we'll talk about this study in depth. And so here was the purpose. We want to look at randomized controlled trials. And so randomized controlled trials are our gold standard in science. So we have a control group and we have an intervention group, and sometimes we use placebos, alternative treatments, but that helps us to understand, did this treatment work in comparison to alternative treatments? And so, as I mentioned previously, depression is a major precursor among suicide among Black girls and women. Suicide rates have increased. Some of that research on that has been done here at Ohio State University. And we have a critical gap. Are things that are labeled evidence-based, do they work for Black women and girls? And here was our process. We used a Prisma framework, a really good search, EBSCOhost, Scopus, Web of Science. It was over a 20-year time period to capture several studies. And so reviewed 715 abstracts. And out of that, we came up with 12 randomized controlled trials. And then we use specific intervention categories: behavioral treatments, pharmacological treatments, family-centered treatments, and then primary care interventions. And these are major findings. And I label this an illusion of evidence-based practice because we think we have such a great research based on several issues, several disorders, and we talk about those like really frequently. Oh, we're just gonna use cognitive behavioral therapy. That's what works. But our research proved that wasn't the case. We only found two studies that targeted Black girls and women, and only one of those reported effect sizes. And what I mean by effect sizes are how well did this intervention work based on a standardized protocol. And so only one study used that. And then here's what we found across studies. Several studies didn't disaggregate by race or gender. So they just report outcomes like, hey, this worked really well. You should use it. However, we know just because something works for one population doesn't mean it works for another population. And so it was really impossible for Ms. Sharif to determine what was the true effectiveness of these interventions. So interventions did show effectiveness. We have treatments that we know that work for depression. Okay. However, if your group is not included in the evidence base, does that work for you? So it raises this major question. How are practitioners expected to implement interventions when it doesn't reflect their students? And that was something that we looked at for our follow-up study. And this follow-up study that I'll talk about now was led by Ms. Raina Hutchinson, who's also a doctoral candidate in the school psychology program, along with Ali Stutz and Tisha Answansu. They're also her colleagues in the school psychology program. And this study is a follow-up of a study that I published it's been a while now, 2021 you also looked at the Wentworth Clearinghouse for behavioral interventions. And I looked at not just my research group, we looked at specific interventions that they labeled evidence-based for behavior and social emotional learning. And what we found in that study is a majority of studies listed in Wentworth's Clearinghouse as evidence-based, they didn't include Black children. And so we looked more specifically this time, and we looked at a practice guide, and I'll talk about that in a second. But preparing young children for school, a practice guide, and we want to look specifically at, does the intervention work in this practice guide? Does it have a large sample of Black children? How are they represented within the Wentworth Clearinghouse database? And so here's what the practice guides looks like. This is just a screenshot from the Wentworth Clearinghouse, so I could show the audience which one we use, and also they might want to do follow-ups on other practice guides. And so the one we used was released in August of 2022, preparing young children for school. And practice guides work like this. The U.S. Department of Education convenes a task force of experts in each of the areas that you see listed on the practice guide. So if you go to this website or just search preparing young children for school, Word's Clearinghouse, and you open that PDF, it'll show you who's on the task force for each of these. And these are experts in the community. These are college professors. These are individuals who really have expertise in these specific areas. And so they actually conduct searches that maintain the evidence base for each of these domains and areas. And here's what we found. Well, I'll tell you a little bit more about the Wentworth Clearinghouse for people who aren't familiar. It influences everything. It's one of the most powerful groups that we have in the U.S. Department of Education because, since its design, it was designed to be a clearinghouse. Where can teachers, school psychologists, early childhood educators, where can they go to find evidence, interventions for issues that they might see in schools? It's really hard once you graduate, and you don't have affiliation with the university. How do I go about gaining library access? How do I go about gaining article access to the latest research? Well, the Wentworth Clearinghouse was designed to help with that process. They said, hey, we'll get experts to examine all the literature, and we'll do this and provide it for free to practitioners and anyone who wants access. And so the one we chose, again, preparing young children for school. And our major question, does the research used to develop these recommendations actually include Black children? And there were 49 articles that were cited within this practice guide. So we did not do a meta-analysis or a systematic review. Independent systematic review. Our review was that of what the U.S. Department of Education, what the Wentworth Clearinghouse, what this panel of experts said are the empirical articles that make up the evidence base for preparing young children for school. So review those 49 articles that they included. And there's a big representation and reporting gap. And I'll sit with this for a few minutes. So what we have, what I call a two-thirds problem. Okay. Just say about 67% of studies included fewer than 25% of black children, or no black children at all, or just didn't report race at all. So we had no idea the race of children, who was included in the study. And that's a major problem. Okay. If again, if your group is not included, how do you know that intervention is going to work? Because we have different circumstances. We might have a preschool classroom in an under-resourced community that could be. I'm from Appalachia. I'm from West Virginia, the southernmost county in West Virginia, really rural. And when I grew up in that county, it was the poorest county in the United States of America. And so some of the issues that we face, or I face as a West Virginian, aren't issues that you would face if you lived in Columbus and you had access to the Schonbaum Family Center or research by Crane faculty affiliates. And so you have the top of the line everything. But I grew up in an under-resourced community. So I would need to know, based on the structural conditions that I grew up in, based on the structural conditions of the issues I see, like some of the issues that we might see might be food insecurity, or I lived in a food desert growing up. So children who might have those type of issues might not be the same. So we need to include demographic information in all the research. So not to talk about race and ethnicity, not to include certain groups in our research base, it really limits that. And then next, you see like colorblind research. What we know from everything, uh, the term colorblind was a good term when originally conceptualized. But what we know, we people see color. We can't sugarcoat that. We can't hide that. When you watch this Zoom, you see that I'm a black man, and I don't shy away from that. That's my identity, and I love that. So we need to stop thinking about that. But 18% of articles used the bill did not mention the race of participants at all. It just we didn't talk about it. Here's the study, and they still included that. And depending on who was on that panel, you can see why they would. Like sometimes research can be done really well. A randomized control trial, it could be funded by the U.S. Department of Education or the National Institute of Health, but it still might not be basic research that people like myself, when I came into the field, I want to see the race. I want to see, was this conducted in West Virginia? Was this conducted in Columbus, Ohio? What were the SES of the individual? Those type of things. And so the next one I'm talking about, the domain specific invisibility. And so 75% had fewer than 25 black children in the self-regulation domain. Half did not report race at all. Social emotional learning, no studies in that domain included a majority of black sample. And then language and math, more than half the studies in this domain included fewer than 25% of black participants. Now, I included self-regulation and social emotional learning here uh, specifically because what we know about black children, specifically black boys, I focus on those, they get suspended at higher rates in schools and early childhood settings. And it's for those issues, according to the research, self-regulation, social emotional learning skills that teachers say aren't developed when they come to school. And so if a teacher went to preparing for early childhood practice guide, they would say, well, what studies are they including? What do they say? What's the research base on self-regulation, social emotional learning for kiddos who are going to preschool? Because I don't want to suspend the kids. No teacher wants to suspend the kid in early childhood. And they want to remove a kiddo from classroom. So they'll say, what intervention can I use to make sure everything's okay? But if they went there, none of those studies really include black children. So it's really tough to gauge, are the teachers not implementing interventions with fidelity? Or are the interventions just not meant for this specific population, because certain issues that might arise in one population or one demographic group, they just aren't there. So these are real issues that we have, and things that people really need to think about before they say this is a good study, this is not a good study. And the U.S. Department of Education really needs to think long and hard about who's on the panel that determines what is evidence-based. And so here's some implications for urban school equity. We have to stop that first bullet point, 'cause this is a pet peeve of mine, the assumption of universality. And then I'm a school psychologist by training, and so I really understand individual differences in learning and assessment. And so I wish the world would start doing a better job of understanding that we need to really break down that everything is not universal. It might work for some, but it might not work for all. And the good thing about us as a research community, we have the means and ways to conduct a randomized trial in different locations and different demographic groups and different was it urban, rural, suburban. We have the ability to do that, but for whatever reason, our ability to do that is not making it into journal articles, into the research base. We need to ask those questions why. And then the zero cultural adaptation work, sometimes interventions are great and it just needs a minor cultural adaptation. And I'll give you an example. I use social emotional learning interventions a lot in schools. And this was in 2016, 2017. My research group and we were doing an intervention called Strong Start, Strong Kids. And it was developed by the late Dr. Kenneth Merrill from the University of Oregon. And so it's a great intervention as a base, okay? But some of the things that we were seeing and feedback we getting from teachers is that maybe some of the lessons, the kiddos didn't relate to some of the lessons. And so a couple of my colleagues, and it was led by, well, she's now Dr. Candace Aston. She's the program director at Towson University. She went to the library at the university I was at the time, and she was a doctoral student, and she switched out all the recommended readings. And so we had a predominantly Black population. I think that school we were in at that time was 99% African American. And she worked with the research librarian at that university, and they had several books that we used for the rest of the intervention, and the teacher said that really improved what they thought the intervention looked like. The kiddos saw themselves in the books, they were more interested in the lessons and those type of things. And so none of the interventions that we looked at in the What Works Clearinghouse practice guide for young children, none of those were culturally adapted at all. And cultural adaptation can be as simple as changing books, modifying stories to include Black characters could be the main character in the story. So it could be simple as that, or it could be a lot different, and you go in and bring in experts to look at your intervention and help you make it more relevant for whatever community. Like if I had to do that in West Virginia, I might change the individuals there to people who are native from West Virginia, or things that were happening where I was from. My father was a coal miner. His father was a coal miner, and those are things people can really relate to where I'm from. Hard work, discipline, and sometimes just those are little tweaks you can make that make it more relevant, and so kiddos are more interested. And then systemic consequences. If you don't have this data, then Black children who already face significant gaps and barriers, because everyone knows about the preschool suspension gap that we have, exclusionary discipline when kiddos get to school, suspension expulsion rates. It might just be the interventions themselves. Like teachers really are trying and they say, well, I've tried this and this and this and it doesn't work. But it might be the stakeholders, it might be researchers like myself who haven't done a good job of providing them with tools that they really need. And so just lastly, to call for stakeholders, and this is more for grant folks, we should have to start asking questions about cultural validity and evidence-based labels. And so that's what we did. Okay. So we this study was just presented at the National Association of School Psychologists in Chicago. And these are two of my advisees, Miss Lexi Myers, Miss Ebony Mundy. And so they're part of my mental health grant. And so what we did, we interviewed school psychologists. So we here's this title, Redefining Roles, Urban School Psychologists' Views on Mental Health. So we have this evidence base that's missing a lot of things. So we decided, hey, let's go to people who are actually doing this work and ask them what they really think about mental health. Like, what are the needs? What are you really doing? Like, what's really happening? And so we kind of started from scratch. No more packaged. Here's what the U.S. Department of Education is saying, or here's what the research is saying. We've identified those gaps, right? We've looked at depression, we looked at behavior, we looked at early childhood, and we see this is not happening. Like this, the people who want to help don't have the tools, particularly for Black children. So this was the study we did. And so this study, the other two studies I just talked about are published, as you can see. But this study I'm about to submit for publication in the next week or so. But just wanted to put this picture there to salute them for their hard work and helping me get this done. So here's a background. We talk about urban. Urban's kind of hard to define. What is an urban community? And Miller in 2012 like urban community as urban intensive, urban emergent, like urban characteristics. So you can have characteristics of an urban community, but not really be what we call an urban community. Urban emergent, like these are cities that have urban characteristics that are growing, right? Expanding. They're not, the suburbs are shrinking and people are doing more um emerging urban things. Urban intensive. Like we like this is an urban area, the characteristics. And then that last part of this slide, it talks about in comparison to suburban town and rural schools, urban schools face these issues. Racial tension, student bullying, widespread disorder in the classroom. And the last one is I maybe should have put this first. It's really key. We provide the most mental health assessment. Like school psychologists assess a lot in urban schools. Guidance counselors assess a lot in urban schools, but the second lowest rate of mental health treatment. So not a lot of treatment, a lot of assessment, a lot of testing. We want to find out what's wrong. Okay, we give you rating scales, IQ test, achievement test, and we do a really good job of that. But the next step is what we don't do a real good job, mental health treatment. And so we can get practitioners' views on that. And just a little bit. I know people think about urban a lot. We're at Ohio State University and what happens in urban schools, and we should be experts on that. But in my field of school psychology, there only been two urban specific studies. And what I mean by that, just studies that target urban areas. And there have been interventions that have been conducted in urban schools if you look at the methods section, but only two studies. This study that I did in college with 2014, I surveyed urban school psychs and I say, what are your roles and characteristics like? When we look at national data, it's not just aggregated by, urban, suburban, rural. So I asked specific questions, and it was the same thing. It hasn't changed, even though that's been over a decade. They have heavy caseloads. One school psychologist sometimes will be assigned to 2,000 students. Our national ratio should be 1 to 500, so they're way over that. And then heavy on special education compliance, just test in place. Give IQ tests, give achievement tests, and place children in special education. And then that's kind of what they do. They don't have time to do other things. And other studies published in 2019, it just said urbanicity shapes diagnostic practices. Diagnostic practices in suburban schools are totally different than urban schools. And so we need to look at system level issues and how that impacts things from that standpoint. Now get into this study. Here are research questions. So how do school psychs in urban schools conceptualize mental health? And then what's some barriers today? And then what about training? Like, I'm a professor. I think I'm doing a great job, but it's up to me to ask questions that might be a little bit uncomfortable. What do you think about the training of students that come to you to practice in urban schools? And so here are participants. We had 13 school psychs in a large urban Midwestern district. 100% identified as female, and then a majority were trained at the educational specialist level. So in school psychology, you can have a master's, and the master's is an older degree. Uh, those individuals probably, have graduated, been in the field 20 plus years if you have just a master's. But the universal degree now is an educational specialist for people who practice in schools. And most PhD students, once you get a PhD, you don't work in schools. So very few of our population would have PhDs. And then data collection, semi-structured interviews. Most of the interviews last 45 to 65 minutes, open-ended questions on barriers and trainings. And then we're going to talk about some thematic analysis here in the next slides. So here are our results. So we had theme one. So we had multiple themes, and I'll talk about those. The first is a definition for everyone can see. Student trauma and safety. So a lot of exposure to trauma, community violence, food instability, poverty-related stress. And here's some sub-themes, and I'll talk about the quotes. I'll spend majority of time talking about quotes on each of these thematic slides. And so we have to address the social, emotional, and community barriers if kids don't feel safe and they don't feel regulated. And they don't have their basic needs met. Algebra, math, and reading is not going to be in the forefront of their mind. They're worried about, am I going to get food tonight? Am I going to be safe when I get home? And so those are things within that trauma domain that people really think about, safety, am I secure? What's going to happen afterwards? And that takes away from like the algebra, math, and reading standpoint. And people think which one comes first? Is it academics? Is it social emotional? And this is the psychologist in me. I'm one to argue the safety part comes in first. That you can't concentrate on academics until you feel regulated, until you feel safe, until your blood pressure is lower, until you feel comfortable in your environment, that you don't have to look over your shoulder, basically. And so this is the number one theme that school psychologists and urban schools taught: student trauma and safety, and being tuned with systemic barriers. And so this is not this is not just the urban schools thing, but it was big for it was significant for the psychologists we surveyed in urban schools. And so here's some things: access to services, role constraint, and the big bureaucracy when you work in these school districts. So I'll talk about a couple things, but this quote really stood out. We finally get a clinician started with the student, and then the family moves, the therapist changes. It's a revolving door. And so I know you saying, well, Scott, these are psychologists. What do you mean by clinician? So that gets back to role constraint. School psychologists are trained to do a lot of different things. We have courses on therapy, we have courses on social emotional learning, assessment, and school psychologists can do various things in schools, but they usually have this role constraint in urban schools that the test and they place because they have so many students assigned to them. And it's easier to get a job in urban schools because the turnover is high. And so that's generally what happens. You have a core group of psychologists who work in urban schools, but sometimes you have high turnover in individuals who've been working in that school district, just say less than 5 years, and then they go to different places, so you have role turnover. But the role constraint gets back to people partner with, I'll just give you an example. Schools in Columbus might partner with Nationwide Children's Hospital. Schools in West Virginia might partner with West Virginia University Medical Center because they, reach out to these clinicians because they understaffed at the school district themselves, and they provide services, but it's not consistent. So a kiddo could be doing really good and everything, and the clinician just leaves. They're a master's level clinician, they get another job and those type of things. So that's tough for school psychologists when they think, hey, we can't provide the services, and we're gonna get other people too. But how do we make that happen if people are changing? And then theme three, cultural mismatch and communication gaps. And this goes back to just the shortage of diversity in the field of school psychology. Our field is predominantly white, predominantly women. Our current demographics are, I think, 85% women in the field, and I'll just talk about Black population specific. I think African Americans probably make up less than 5%, and Black males make up probably like less than 1%. So it's a predominantly white female, but in my subgroup category, it's about 1% of people like myself, Black and who identify as a man. And so, but this cultural mismatch, communication gaps happen, cultural backgrounds, lived experiences between the psychologist and then the families they serve. And so sometimes it's a communication gap. How do you communicate and get on the same page? And that can be difficult at times. And so trust. And let's talk about this quote a little bit. This is from a psychologist. I just want the child in school, and the parent dropped probably 30 F-bombs on me because I was just trying to figure out how to get her child to school. She told me she was done kissing and I kept saying, I'm just trying to help you and trying to figure out how to get your son to school so he can learn. And so that was a major communication gap. When she after the interview, she talked about that's what's going on. And sometimes I even have, you know, trouble communicating with certain parents in my school. And so we have these cultural mismatches and differences in backgrounds. And so it's also a big issue, a big problem when we think about issues in schools. And theme four, this is the one I was most interested in, just because I'm a trainer, training and preparation gaps. And these are, I'm not embarrassed to say these are 100% accurate. Especially looking at the sub teams, limited preparation for mental health work in urban schools, need for more real world hands-on experience, and need for realism and role socialization. So um, the best quote here was more of a hands-on experience, not just a practicum in a well-resourced school. They need to see the chaos a little bit, and that's true. A lot of times, especially the students that come to depend on the university. I won't generalize so much, depending on the university, students want to have the easiest experience, the smoothest experience, I should say. And sometimes the smoothest experience is not available, and it shouldn't be available. You should be able to work with all kids in all situations if you graduate from a program, specifically Ohio State University. And that's not always the case. So sometimes, depending on the experience, school psychologists get interns or prac students who aren't ready for that. And, is that a training issue where we are selecting students who maybe don't want to work in high need schools? Is it a practicum issue where we need to, place students in different locations? I think it's a little bit of both. Sometimes, we can't deny access to a good student, right? So you have to say this student has excelled. They have we usually in our program GPAs at minimum maybe 3.5. A minimum would be like a 3.5. We have several people have view 4.0s and excellent letters of recommendation and those type of things, and have research experience. And we have people coming in now that maybe published a study or so or coded data as an undergrad for a research team. And so these are really good students for our EDS program. And but some of those students don't have real world experience working with groups that are outside of people they look like. And so it's a tension that we face. How can we do a better job as a program? But these are real things that are happening, training and preparation gaps. And then I'm just revisit the research questions a bit to do a little bit of summary on this study. So how do school sites working in urban schools conceptualize student mental health needs? Primarily through trauma and chronic stress. That's the issue that we need to talk about more. Community violence, grief and poverty, and anything that you can see in the newspaper as adults, we can kind of overlook a little bit, right? We can say, oh, this happened over there, or I can shut my door. Kiddos can't do that because they have no control over their environments. Whatever their parents are going through, they're going through. Whatever the school psychologists and the teachers are going through. And so, the school psychologists in this study are saying we need more trauma-related services. Trauma-related dysregulation can be misinterpreted as ADHD, defiance of disability, and then teachers say we need to test this kiddo. It's just trauma-related dysregulation. It's really not something that we should place a student in special education for. And then question two, how do school sites describe their roles? Largely just reactive. They don't get a chance to choose what they really want to do. Whatever's going on in the environment, that's what they have to react to. And the immediate crisis over long-term intervention. And then question three, what barriers? The kiddos just don't have access to mental health services, inconsistent community partnerships, and that bureaucracy always comes up. That people in places who make decisions don't communicate with them. They're the last to know, even though it's their job to do what individuals trying to tell them to do. And then question four, adequate graduate training. They said our coursework is only theoretical and can sometimes be disconnected from practice. And they're 100% right. Graduate programs nationwide are constrained by accreditation bodies. For instance, I'm a psychologist. We have two different accreditation bodies, the National Association of School Psychologists and the American Psychological Association. And sometimes classes that I might want to teach, they aren't within that prescribed area. And it's extra courses that students would have to pay extra for. And we have a condensed timeline for each of those. And so we don't have time for a lot of electives. And so those are things that we need to really address, and more immersive field experiences. If you want to work in a school like this, you need to get there early and get there often. So then here's what we said after that study. Like, hey, that sounds good. People are doing something in schools, but what are they doing to help alleviate this trauma-related stress and this dysregulation? So we asked the next question. So let's focus on the intervention to help solve some of these problems, okay? And this is a screenshot I took when I was trying to conceptualize what to do. So you can see at the bottom is November 27th, 2023. This was on the now X, but Twitter. I don't have my account anymore, but I'm glad I took this screenshot. This was this was placed by the U.S. Department of Education, posted on their active page, and as you see at the top, zones of regulation. You have the different zones, what they mean, and here's what they say. Here's how you can support mental well-being, motivation Monday. And if you use these, academic outcomes will improve, discipline referrals, attendance and graduation. So U.S. Department of Education, it's almost an official endorsement of zones of regulation, which I thought, okay, that was interesting. And the reason I said it's interesting because here's what we know about zones of regulation. here's a screenshot of a study, not a study I was a part of. I don't know these researchers and I don't have any financial stake at all in this research. So this is independent from me. But if you, the abstract is small, but I'll read a little bit to you. To date, little empirical evidence to show the efficacy of zones of regulation, and according to standards, some we use APA, um, National Standards Clearinghouse, those type of things. Zones of regulation does not meet the standards for evidence-based practice. And so they provide suggestions because they did this systematic review. So based on all the clearinghouses, all the national associations, zones is not an evidence-based practice. So it's interesting that school psychologists use it, counselors use it. It's promoted by the U.S. Department of Education. So I started to ask practitioners like, why are you using this? So here's the study that this study is ongoing. Okay, well, I'll get to that in a second. It's ongoing though. This is not finalized studies like the previous three that I talked about. So these are preliminary, but here's zones. It's a standardized curriculum, cognitive behavior program delivered by teachers or school psychs, 18 lessons, about 30 to 60 minutes each. True social emotional learning curriculum. So how you use emotions, you use a color-coded system. They teach strategies for self-regulation and then guide students on how to apply these in different situations. So that is pretty straightforward, social emotional learning curriculum. But here's our method. So qualitative design, semi-structured interviews, and as I put at the last bullet point, data collection is ongoing. We haven't finished yet. So, but I did some early thematic analysis to see what I found among those. We still have two more interviews to conduct. So here's three, have still two to conduct. So here's preliminary results, okay? On our themes. So what are some primary, barriers of using just say zones? Why'd you choose? And so three of those lack of instructional time. Okay, so they say they like zones, they say they use it, but they have a lack of instructional time to really use even zones. They say the board of education in this specific district just shifted away from a whole child focus. So they're now back to reading, math, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the school um that I went to, reading, math. We didn't do social emotional learning, to my knowledge. But we do that now in the board of education. We're getting away from that. We're moving away from the whole child focus back to 100% academics. And then the participant says the biggest challenge is getting the time to be able to do it. The biggest barrier, the other participant, biggest barrier for me is time. Teachers won't give me time to take students out of class to do zones. I said, okay. So they're using zones regardless, but they're saying time is a barrier. And then theme two. So OSU has a grant with this specific school, and it said before the grant, they had limited resources and programming. So they weren't even able to buy some of the zones curriculum. They liked it, some of the other people had it. And then two different quotes, one participant, 3-1. Have resources available to you because of the grant I normally wouldn't have. And the grant's been able to provide some of that for zones of regulation and bounce back. So uh this grant was able to buy different curriculums. Zones is what we're talking about, but bounce back is more for trauma. And so that's one of the reasons they're able to use social emotional learning. And then cultural adaptations. So they modified zones to better reflect their diverse populations. And participant three was really interesting. We recreated everything. It was not appropriate for urban district. And so I have some more data on this that I'll talk about when I publish this article. Because I followed up with, well, why do you use zones if it's not appropriate for a district? And the participant was honest about it. And they said, well, this is all we have. This is what we know. This is what's promoted to us. And so we use it. They don't go around and look at the Workforce Clearinghouse or they don't read journal articles on these things. Hey, this is what other school sites are using. So we do it. So it's more word of mouth. Someone goes to a training, someone goes to APA, which are American Psychological Association, or the National Association for School Psychologists Convention. They pick up something and people use it. So it's almost like a snowball effect. One person uses it and then everybody uses it. So it shows the type of influence you can have if you can bring in appropriate materials. School psychs will try it, but it's up to people like myself and others who are interested in early childhood education to provide them with materials. And then participant one said, we try to use materials that are a little bit more reflective of our student population. So they're trying to culturally modify these, selecting more books, video clips, and updating materials. And then theme four, collaboration is limited. Um, most work conducted independently alongside OSU graduate students. So this grant places graduate students within schools so they can get mental health experiences, also to increase the number of mental health providers in schools. And so, but they don't have other collaborations with school psychologists in the district. So they implement zones. However, like participant two said, no, that would be a nice thing to do when she collaborates with colleagues. So it's a silo. Like we have interventions, but we don't necessarily work within the group to do those. And then the other participant one said, because of the grant, there's been some more communication to kind of align what we're doing, but it's not district wide or universally accepted. And that's when measuring outcomes is challenging. So I know you said, well, zones, people use it a lot. It's on the U.S. Department of Education website. So they have some anecdotal evidence, which sounds good, but it's difficult to capture evidence, like using formal measures. They just don't have time. So they have existing questionnaires, but they're not really sensitive to real change in these schools. And so here's what participant two said, which is really telling. I do see change in the kids. I hear them using the vocabulary, they use the tools, but we need a better way to capture what's really going on. And so that is also an educator problem, a trainer problem in urban schools. What they're using for zones for outcomes is not measuring what the outcomes that the school psychologists are administering show them. So we need more sensitivity in measures and the curriculum itself. But this is what school psychologists say based on these preliminary results. And theme six, advocacy and buy-in. Teacher support, if they want to be in the same building. And then school psychologists saying we need to be part of that. What types of programs is the district buying and forcing us to use SEL wise? And they're not at the table right now. The district just says, here's what we're going to give to you. Here's what we're going to purchase. And if you don't have anyone using that same language, not going to generalize. So the people who do cultural modifications, they're doing a good job and they see change. But if you're not also using cultural modifications, using the same language, in programs like zones, you might not see those same results. And I just give examples of modifications that they just use. All three noted materials exclusively white children felt alienating for the students. So P1 and P2, P3, those are participant one. I just didn't want to spell out. So participant one began using updated materials that includes more diverse imagery. Participant three went further. Her and her practicum student recreated the materials entirely from scratch. They said, "This is just we like the format, we like the color coding system, but they use custom storybook, has specific students in their groups, African American and Hispanic boys, and so then tailoring lessons on the right, selected books and video clips that made a big difference." And then more modifications, picking and choosing rather than following the book. And I'll go one more. And then so I can get the questions. Then supplementing. So they said it was good, but it wasn't enough. And so they integrated tools like PAX, which is the good behavior game, along with zones of regulation. And P2 simply pulled the techniques from a cognitive behavioral therapy professional development session. So it was mix and match of what we're going to do and how we're going to do those. And then in conclusion, for this presentation, again, myth of universality, all these things don't work for all children. We have big reporting gaps and then framework limits. Right now, my colleagues who are researchers, we prioritize internal validity versus external validity and equity. Who does this work for outside of our laboratory setting, outside of this controlled setting that we have grants for and that they fund us for? And then ethical responsibility. If you really want a child to achieve and to reach their maximum potential, you have an ethical responsibility to seek guidelines and make these protocols less standard. Like we want a standard intervention, but to help that work for everyone. So what works for some doesn't work for all. And then I'll take questions and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Scott. We do have a couple questions coming in the Q&A, so I'll start with those, but please, audience members, keep adding questions there if you have them for Dr. Graves. A couple specific, sort of more practice-based questions. One about conscious discipline. Do you think that conscious discipline is more appropriate for urban school districts for these younger children?
I think conscious discipline is a good start. From an evaluation standpoint, I would need to see more as far as outcomes and who's involved and those type of things. Right now, if I had to pick a something universal to do, I like a lot of social emotional package curriculums. I'll be honest about that because starting from scratch is really hard. I've started from scratch a few times, and it's just difficult to get those published and moved along the pipeline. So conscious discipline is a good start, but I do like package programs and then modifying those to your specific population. So if
Mhm.
conscious discipline had more research behind it, I think it's promising. I think it is promising.
Thanks. Another question, whether you have a reading list for education professionals to help them better understand and address the communication gap that you talked about specifically between the school psychologists and families. This audience member says, long ago, as an early childhood educator, I knew that I benefited from reading The Essential Conversation by Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot and reading from Stacey York's books. Talking about, not making assumptions about the families in their classroom, since none of them share a common family culture, and they didn't want to do something that might upset or offend them, but obviously that was not what they intended to do that, and we're open to learning and trying to build that relationship. But could you speak to any sort of reading list or resources that you could provide to audience members?
Here's what I'll do. Since everyone is on the Crane Center, Showman Family Center list, I'll provide a list to Dr. Dorr, and she can
Yep,
send that out to the list when she sends out the recording for this. So I promise I'll get that to
that
Dr.
would be
Dorr,
great.
and she can send those things out. So I'll be happy to do that.
Excellent. One question I had while we wait for some others to come in was about I was shocked by that 18% colorblind stat that you put from your one of the earlier studies. Is most of that research older? Like, are they citing studies from 50 years ago, or that's studies from 10 years ago where the journals really aren't asking them to report
Uh, t
race or
they're re
ethnicity?
they're really not asking to report race or ethnicity, and it's only been recently. I said in the last I'll go 7 years or so that people
Yeah.
have really been conscious about that. APA has guidelines now, and NIH, you have to report out, grant wise, what are you doing? But before that, it's hit or miss depending on the journal editor. And I'll just talk about my field specifically.
Hmm.
In school psychology, that really wasn't institutionalized. You just reported your study. Here's the population. And population, I mean sample size. You
Right.
have 10 individuals in this. They were in the urban, rural, suburban, and here are the results. So that really wasn't institutionalized until recently. So in those studies that they chose, Dr. Dorr, for the practice guide and the randomized trials, and all those randomized trials, as you know, are funded. And the studies they chose in What Works Clearinghouse have all been published in really good journals by really what
Hmm.
we consider like high quality
Yeah.
researchers who do nationally known and those type of things. So yeah, just haven't been institutionalized, and they just don't report out, and so that's still a problem we face with our research base.
Yeah. That's shocking and helpful. Um, we're getting some more questions about school district policy. So I didn't realize that the state requires school districts to only use certain approaches or curriculum regarding SEL discipline. What would you wish for in terms of state education policy? This person says they live in a district that is majority Black, but they were using one of the ones you cited that didn't work well for that population.
We need more stakeholder involvement. I'm not sure the knowledge base. I'm not sure the people who make these decisions have access to the research that we talk about on a daily basis as
Hmm.
far as this needs to be culturally modified or this doesn't work, because a lot of times what they get is what works clearinghouse information. And we have people at the policy level who work in state departments of education who read the workforce clearinghouse because they have state level grants. They talk to those people, and so they just don't know. It's a lack of knowledge on that. But yeah, we have several prescribed. I'll just talk about the state of Ohio just for a little bit. So in Ohio, there are only certain assessments that I can use as a psychologist to say to assess for reading, to assess for math. So they do have a lot of prescribed curriculums that count towards certain things, like certain IQ. Certain districts mandate you give this type of IQ test over this IQ test, and they purchase X amount of those assessments. So a lot of is prescribed in education, which is
Hmm.
unfortunate. So if I had a wish list, or if I could do that, I would have open policy exchanges with
Hmm.
people who are from different backgrounds, like the professor part, the practitioner part, and the district leadership part, before states made those type of decisions that impact that pipeline I just talked about. So that would be my wish list, is to have open forums about SEL, about trauma-informed care. What
Mhm.
should we, because we mandate a lot of things and districts are forced to purchase certain curriculums, but they don't work a lot of times.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Another question coming in saying they work with school nurses, and so much of this talk so much of the things you're talking about are aligned with the workforce issues they're seeing as well. And this attendee is curious if you could talk a little more about your ideas and thoughts you've had about how to address the issue of getting school staff some time back to help collect the evidence we need to inform practices.
I've been, this is my 20th year as I graduated 20 years ago this year. It's been a long time. And when I was trained, the reason I mentioned that, when I was trained, we had a full service school. So I was in went graduate from University of Kentucky, and we had in Lexington, Kentucky, we had a good partnership with the medical school and graduate school, and so that full service school was several practicum students in psychology and nursing and medicine and social work, and we did that type of work. And I say we, the trainees, because school psychologists right now, the way it's set up, school nurses as well and school social workers, school counselor, you name it in this environment.
Mhm.
I don't want to exclude anybody. I'm sorry if I did. They are so reactive. Like they don't get time to be
Mhm.
proactive. So those roles for the individual who asked that question, those roles aren't going to change in the near future because we aren't going to get an influx of money to hire more people. So what you really have to do, and this is what I found effective for my research when I collect data, you have to include graduate students or partners that are
Mhm.
external to your organization. The internal mechanisms move so slow that you either have to write a grant, which is really difficult to get grant funding to do this type of work that we do. So I would say partner with graduate schools, partner with schools in nursing to have those
Mhm.
folks do practice. But part of their practicing would be data collection. Like we implement this intervention. Your job is with fidelity to come in twice a week to understand those things. But that's what I found most effective in my practice because the practitioners, like in my slides, they want to do these things. And they mentioned
Mhm.
without the grant funding they have, they wouldn't even have the ability to purchase the things and the students actually collect the data that you've seen. So it'll be that type of partnership because short term we're just clogged up, not able to do what our real roles should be.
Yeah. A couple more specific questions. One, have you seen or know about the use of the pyramid model?
When I could be wrong, when I think about the pyramid model, I'm thinking the tier one, tier two, and
Mm,
tier three. And so, yes, I have. And a couple of things with the pyramid model. The 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 pyramids that I see in the schools that I'm involved in with my graduate students, my grant work, and schools I do intervention work in myself, that pyramid is upside down. Like, tier one should be everyone, and tier two should be small group, and tier three should be that individual lives. But when I talked about trauma, well, not me, when the school psychologist talked about trauma as their number one, like trauma and care and those type of things. That model's upside down for them. They have so many students who
mm,
a trauma tier one that in other districts that might be a tier three because individual or small group tier two, it just gets difficult to implement that. And like they said, they just don't have the time to go into a classroom to implement a tier one trauma-based intervention. Then you get into specifics because the trauma stuff talks about certain things that kids go through, and some parents might want to opt out of that specific
mm,
curriculum because they don't want their kids to talk about some of the things that include in trauma-based therapy
mhm,
because it's really specific. So it just gets difficult. But yes, the pyramid model does work in several situations. But sometimes in schools that at least that I'm in, that pyramid is upside down. You have a lot of
mhm.
kids who should just be tier three, but they're really tier one. It's just so many of those kiddos.
Interesting. Okay, one more specific request for the information you're going to send Janelle and I afterwards. Will this list of books that you're going to send include recommendations for interventions you found promising for working in different settings?
They can and they can.
Okay,
I
excellent.
also I'll see how this I'll see what Dr. Dora can do. But I can because some of those articles aren't open source.
Mm-hmm.
I can send, but some of those
We
are
can chat
older.
about it.
We can check, Doctor. Some of those are older. Some of those are mine. Like I've picked. So I'll see what we can do about that when she sends out something. Also send either a link or a PDF. And if you can't access the PDF, I have to see what happens with that. You can email me personally for the articles that we put in the list if you can't access them. I'll just have to see what
Perfect. We'll definitely
to
share
do
that
that.
information.
Yeah, but I'll so books for communication and interventions that work. I'll put those two things in the packet that Dr. Door sends out. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, this has been a wonderful presentation and conversation. Thank you again for sharing your work with us, Dr. Graves.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Take care, everyone.
We are wrapping up a few minutes early to leave folks time to fill out a short survey. The link and the QR code, Janelle will put them up on the screen. It really is just a few quick questions. Will only take a minute or two of your time. Your responses are really valuable to us, and we do try to aim for 100% participation on this because the feedback we get from our audience really helps us shape future events, and we want to make sure that they're meaningful to you. So thank you all for joining us today. Take a few minutes to fill out the survey, and we will see you soon. Have a great day.